the normal people like the international bodies, International Organization for Migration, various other UN bodies, quite a number of governments. I think, you know, examples being France, the EU, Switzerland, and a number of other countries. And these are people who clearly have significant amount of money that they can use in appropriate ways to help the remittances industry. Then we've got money transfer companies, individual, but also organizations. And there's quite a lot of diaspora groups as well, so representing the consumer, which is really helpful. And a number of other stakeholders, including some of the individual regulatory bodies, but also standard setters like FATF. So there's been, I think, 2 or 3 meetings, I can't even remember now, for the task force itself. But coming out of the early meetings was a swift decision to actually split into 4 smaller groups covering a variety of work streams. And those 4 work streams are, there's 4 work streams. So the first one is around remittance families. So this is really the senders and receivers, and working on what are their main needs and how can they be assisted, both in the sending and the receiving countries. There's the private sector group, which I'll come back to. Then there's a group on enabling environment. So this is going to be led by the World Bank, but has a number of different stakeholders already working in it. And that's looking at the enabling environment. So this is very much around regulations and how those can be adjusted, how supervisors and others can work together, but also things like operating environments. How can we get interoperability between different systems and so on? And then the final one is on digitization. So that's very much, if you look at the other 3, there's been a strong call, as you know, and some evidence that there has been an improvement, that there has been a switch to digital in certain cases. And I think the idea of this group is to try and look at what can be done in the short term to make it easier for those who choose or are able to use digital to actually do so. So there's those 3 groups, and then there's the private sector group, and the objective of this group is very much twofold really. One is to identify specific areas where money transfer operators require support. So this, you know, the things that we've heard range from remittances being classified as an essential service down to specific help for individual operators who are really suffering during the crisis. So that's one stream. Then there's another stream, which is, well, what can remittance operators do to actually help the senders and receivers of remittances? So it's looking at both sides of that coin. And we have a sort of core team that's represented from one of the industry providers, from Hugo and Nina representing IMTC, or the Platinum Network as it is in its new guise, so both of those. And then we also have the GSMA representing the mobile industry. Plus, we also have obviously support from the IFAD team as well. So that's the core team that's trying to do the doing. In terms of, well, what is the doing? So the doing is really to try and produce a short document that represents the views of as many private sector operators as possible, which can be consolidated with the other 3 work streams to produce a document to be presented and adopted by the United Nations, and then to be used from that to gain funding from the different donor bodies, and to lead to tangible change on items that should be addressed within the next 6 months. So this is not a long-term initiative. This is very much a short-term initiative to try and make real change and provide real support. So I hope that makes sense. So what we're really trying to do is, or like from you, is to get as much insight as possible. And afterwards, Hugo, after this, Hugo and I will be working to publish some of the ideas and feedback we've already got from a number of surveys that have been conducted. And we'd really welcome your input into how we can either make these stronger or additional areas that we haven't thought about. So what I thought I'd just do is give you, if I have time, Hugo, so tell me if I don't, is to give you a bit of an overview from some of the work, survey work that's already been done. And then it will be interesting to compare that with your experiences. So I've just got probably a few minutes on this. But just to say, since the crisis started, there have been 2 or 3 surveys that have been undertaken. The World Bank are publishing a weekly digest on the Remittance Prices Worldwide website, which actually covers tries to identify if there are any pricing changes in remittances from around about 30 different corridors, some of the main ones, and through this also looking at whether there are less operators providing services in the market or if there are less services available. But alongside that, there's also a digest of a roundup of all the articles on remittances that have appeared. But probably most interestingly, there's also a panel survey going on where a group of around about 20 businesses ranging from cash only businesses through to digital only, to large global providers, to some specific corridor providers, are updating us every week on the changes they're seeing in the marketplace since really the crisis started. If anybody would like to join that panel, you'll be very welcome, and just reach out to contact us and we'll provide you with the details. But just to give you a few of the headlines on what we're seeing, it looks like about 3/4 of the people who've responded overall, and there have been a number of other surveys, are still open for business, which is great, but they've actually had to change their operational model quite considerably, either to digital only or even for their internal operations, as many of those have now switched to working from home rather than providing services from an office. And this has impacted call centres as well, so it's been quite a challenge for many. From a pricing viewpoint, very little change. If anything, prices appear to have gone down a little bit since the last global survey, which was taken place in February, so that's quite interesting. The majority of operators, about 80%, have seen a decrease in volumes, and this has varied from between 5% to 90 to 95% in some cases, depending on where they are and what the level of the lockdown is. But on average, if you average all that out from the responses we've had, there's a decline by about 25%, which is interesting because those numbers came out 3 or 4 weeks ago from our surveys, and as you probably saw from the World Bank numbers that came out on their report last week, they quoted around about 20%. So encouragingly, we're in the same ballpark. And then 88% of the people have actually seen that customers are, the use of digital has really increased. So that's been quite important and an interesting sign. Some of the specific issues we've seen, first of all, the global nature of the crisis, everybody knows about it, but that's really having a catastrophic effect on the market. Reductions in cash payment networks, significantly reduced operating hours for people, less remittances being sent, and an increase in overheads for a number of operators and the shift to digital. So I might stop there because I think some of our other contributors may have to leave shortly in case they want to speak now, and then maybe come back to that in a minute. So I think Kathy is going to speak now. So let me stop there because we all want to hear from her.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, Kathy.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the time. Unfortunately, I had another meeting to attend to. Some of the things that I think that here in the U.S. and with the association that we have been focusing on are operational issues. We here are happy to report that here in the U.S. we started with the Treasury Department memorandum on March 22nd that defined financial services as a critical infrastructure sector. And that really helped us to provide and establish guidance in the states. So where all these locations were changing and coming on board or staying in place state by state, we were able to point to that, and companies were able to point to that memorandum as providing guidance. We had a couple bumps in the road with New York in the beginning, and as of today, we're happy to report that in all states, with the exception of some little minor provisions in New Mexico, we are essential services and are operating. I think that coming from your report, when you're seeing the reduction from an in-person and people working remote, that is true of our membership as well. And it will be interesting to see next week as many states in the US begin to open up in small numbers, how this may affect the rollouts of companies and such. We spoke this past week with some of our companies, and they have very specific plans about how they'll handle offices, bringing people in, how they will self-distance, how they'll track the health of employees. Those are all important aspects there. The other thing that we have been working on, as everyone here knows, the U.S. is a patchwork of regulation of 50 states. So we have been working with the Conference of State Banking Supervisors to help provide continuity from a policy and a systems perspective. So tracking of your licensing and the financial reporting that you have to do is controlled by a system referred to as NMLS. But there's also policies associated with that system. So early on, we were able to get them to be able to produce a consolidated report for us, which they update, and it's actually available to their website. So that's been helping companies track, what are the requirements of the states? What are their reporting requirements? Are they extending financial reporting requirements? We've asked for extensions in many cases because working from remote areas, companies have to establish procedures and things to support that. We also provided, just for the general information, a COVID-19 resources page on our website. And on that website, there's links to key information about the regulations and the timing updates. But the other thing is that we are fortunate to have many associate members, and they're members like large law firms who are providing a number of webinars to our members and others actually for free at no charge on different topics, not just the remittance and the payments and the reporting, but also to be able to understand what is your responsibility as an employer, how do you set up your room. There's a lot of different things. We also did things for the members. One of the big things that's rolling out now here in the US are the stimulus checks. So we worked with the Treasury Department so that they could see the numbers that are rolling out, how to check for fraud. I don't know that some of these issues are the same in other parts of the world, but with the stimulus payments there rolling out, we expect to see significant increases in fraud scenarios, really trying to confuse people and threaten them to turn over their money. So putting information out there for people to understand that is important. And then the final organization that we have approached, and I think this is more global from a remittance perspective, is that we have asked the CFPB, who's defined Reg E and the remittance rule, to provide some accepted relief for companies. As part of our regulatory requirements, we are required to let the individual know when the money will be picked up and what the details are. And as the challenges around the world, that's an item that we can't always guarantee. So we've asked for them to weigh in with some type of short-term relief. So these aspects, I think, that we're doing, we're really focused on operationally trying to help the MTs and other companies, general MSPs, as much as possible to operate efficiently in this environment, and hopefully then that allows them to focus on, you know, their business and their outreach to the consumer and addressing the needs from that perspective. That's my update. I don't know if you have any questions.
Well, thank you, Kathy. I know that you need to leave us. Thank you for the update. I think the MSBA is doing a tremendous job in getting the industry to come up, and we welcome, you know, and I say of the private sector workstream, we welcome any information that you and your members can bring to us, so we can pass it along and make sure that they're there as your contribution to all of this. So thank you. I also want to mention that the Industry Advisory Council, which is a group that was formed by the industry with the regulators, the state regulators, the MTRA. We had a meeting, and there was a very interesting meeting in which the industry told the regulators, this is our problem, we need this, more on the operational side of things, reporting and new licenses and all of that. But I want to bring that in, and you're going to see a report that Amy Winwood she provided to me, and we're gonna pass it along. And but what the emphasis here is the importance of the industry to be able, through their associations, to talk to regulators, to use the situation that we're living as something that should be done in a much more active way and permanent basis of this talk. I know some few countries have associations, as I said before, but I think it's important that this dialogue with regulators happens and happens more frequently than has passed in the past. If we have questions from the participants, please come forward. Leon, if there's something you want to say, let's do so while Joyce gets some of the questions. I think there's one for you here, Leon, on the chat. Can you see it? It says, Mr. Isas, can you give us an example of the types of proposals that the industry has submitted or that your group has discussed?
Yeah. Hi. Yes, thanks for that question, because that was my next set of notes. So that's really good as well. So I think there's a number of different areas that we've looked at, ranging from operability of businesses, sustainability of businesses, and then technical support, as well as broader issues about what's being done to help those who are sending or receiving remittances. So some of the things we've been looking at, one would be the declaration, I think as Kathy said, has happened in the US, but in many countries it hasn't yet, is the declaration of remittances as an essential service. So we've seen some countries have allowed that, others haven't. Other areas would be in the area of digital remittances, is what support is available for operators or businesses that would like to offer digital or that are offering digital but would like more customers to use it. And some of the things there we've been talking about is what needs to happen in terms of educating consumers and making them aware of the services. It's well known that there's a lot of people who consider cash the only trustworthy method to transfer money, are very distrustful of digital. So there's a lot of work needs to be done to reassure people and tell them how to stay safe with that. Information on how they can actually access digital, what types of identification or onboarding processes are required, things around incentives to customers to actually work with digital, but also what incentives might be required for businesses. And then the whole area of KYC, as we know, it's inconsistent around the world, and we're looking for what can be done to make that easier and reduce the barriers in some cases. We've discussed and are looking at help with de-risking. We know that's been a horrible phenomenon for many years now, but this is a prime opportunity to re-look at it again, particularly as there are some providers that are de-risked, and that's actually impacting not only their ability to serve their customers, but in some cases, severely impacting services to certain countries. Then things around, will it be possible to have some regulatory flexibility? For example, delaying supervision inspections until the crisis is over, or perhaps having a lighter touch approach. Other practical areas like clear guidelines for financial service providers, particularly remittance operators, on when they can reopen and what are the health-related steps they should or could take, and where can they get guidance on that. Things around for countries that are heavily reliant on cash, how can we actually make sure that cash is available where it's needed? We can't pretend that digital is the ultimate solution for every transaction. And so we actually need to ensure that there's more cash being circulated. And then maybe not finally, but clearly, how can we ensure there's financial support for both senders of remittances and their families, but also the money transfer operators themselves where it's needed. So that's really what, those would be sort of, hopefully that answers that a little bit. And then for digital only payments, there's a whole series of other things that we've discussed, but that's a sort of flavor, hopefully, anyway.
Leon, I have to, I'm sorry.
Let me say something, Joyce, sorry.
Okay.
But it's very, and I'm going to provide that information and write a little bit about it because some interesting thing is that especially the agents, but the larger chains of agents, companies that have 10, 15 locations, and they are agents of money transfer operators and agents of other services that they provide. We've been discussing how those agents are able to contribute in this, in the digital aspects. They know their clients, and I was thinking, Leon, that a good project that we could bring forward is how we were able for those agents to not feel that they're losing their customers because they're going into digital, but they can be also agents of change. I know it's very hard. I know regulation, et cetera, agent license regulation, but but there is some few ideas floating around, and they could make a good project. Is how, because agents right now, cash agents are really the ones who are convincing the clients, don't use digital, be careful, they're not good, they play with the foreign exchange. I've seen them, you know, work clients like that, and they have the trust of some clients, or many clients. So how, that's a question, and there's a question that maybe because of the increasing shift of digital, because of the importance of some agents, how they can be also an agents for change in that. That's a question that is bugging my mind, and that we can discuss and use this opportunity to think of ways. I know it's a little bit different, but mobile money operators use cash agents in Kenya and other places to bring them into the digital world with their mobile wallets, et cetera, et cetera. Is not the similar case. There are many differences, but that's something that brought into my mind. So that's what I was going to say, Joyce.
Okay, thank you. I have a few other questions. So Angelina says that, can you recap what the audience member's question was? Something related to proposals of the task force?
I don't understand the question, Angelino, that much, but the idea is that, just to recap, Leon and I are part of this work stream, as it's called, of the Remittance Community Task Force. And this is the private sector work stream. And the idea is getting information from the private sector on things that can be done that are impacting the industry right now because of this pandemic, that the international agents, World Bank, UN, et cetera, can help change, evolve, solve. So we're working in a very short time frame to get as much information as possible to funnel it in an orderly manner to this international agents and donors that want to work on those urgent things. We, Leon and I, think that also this can be an opportunity to bring some of the maybe things that cannot be done urgently, but maybe short term or medium term, they can be addressed. So I hope that answers. There's another question here, and this is this for me, but I'm gonna give it to Leon. How can we be sure that the international bodies will listen to the needs of all the smaller players in the industry and not only the larger MTOs? Leon.
You've taken the easy option there, Hugo, and read the question rather than answering it. So, but I think it's a really good question. I think, and it's interesting actually, because in many ways, a lot of the authorities we've spoken to anyway are trying to pick up what is happening with the smaller players, because they recognize that generally these are more community-based and therefore closer to the customers. And that's actually been one of the first drivers for the international bodies. I think the best way to get them to listen is to provide as much information as possible through the industry associations, but also if you have the time and are able to ourselves on your specific circumstances. What are the big issues for you? What are the big challenges? Because I think the international bodies generally understand the structure of the industry quite well. And whilst they talk to the larger organizations who have departments that can actually deal with public affairs and so on, they're particularly keen to actually find out what's happening to individual operators, and particularly where you're critical to certain corridors. So, you know, I know it's a bit of a wishy-washy answer in a way, but I think the more information you can provide, the better. And I do genuinely get the impression that the international bodies are really trying to work with the smaller operators. And in pretty much every case you have with a development partner, they're always keen to understand who are the people who really understand their market the best. And that's often in global terms, the smaller players, but in corridor terms, some of the larger players. Over to you, Joyce.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the next question is curious about your opinion of the future use of cash. Do you expect any short-term or medium-term repudiation, either at funding or at paying? Would this be transitory?
Hugo, you're normally our cash man. But I mean, I guess it's interesting. I think from what we've seen at a business operator to business operator level, things in, if you're talking about physically moving cash as settlement, so I'm not quite clear exactly on the nuances of this, whether you're looking at it as a funding, as in one operator funding another, or whether you're looking at it from a payout viewpoint. So maybe I'll tackle both of those. From the payout viewpoint, we're clearly seeing a number of instances where it's very difficult for people to be paid in cash, as obviously the lockdown periods have happened in many of the receiving countries as well. And we would see that as a short-term issue, and I think something that definitely needs to be worked on in terms of finding solution for moving cash around countries. So, you know, a good example would be Zimbabwe, for instance, where getting cash was difficult before the COVID-19 pandemic, and is now even harder. So the government there actually needs help with getting physical cash into the country, let alone into the outer areas. I think if you're looking at it in terms of settlement between two money transfer companies, so far we haven't really heard of many challenges there. It seems like settlement itself is working. And then the other point I would sort of say in this whole area around cash is that we are aware of actually in certain countries where there has been a lockdown and that agents have been allowed to reopen, that one of the challenges for the businesses is that of credit with those agents in particular, and whether agents can actually get money into the bank account, particularly cash, pay it into a bank to physically meet their credit obligations. And that seems to be one of the hardest areas to tackle, particularly because money transfer companies clearly do not want to increase credit limits unless they're certain to be paid. So for me, this is, and I think to answer the final point, I would see this, where there are difficulties, this is a short-term difficulty, and it's not a long-term consequence of the crisis. And I expect that will go back to reasonably straightforward cash transactions as soon as the crisis itself dissipates a bit.
Yeah, and I'm going to say that this is also linked to the risking, because agents also have been de-risked. So some of these agents don't have that many channels to be able to make those cash deposits. You know, maybe you know the cash is picked up by one of the cash management companies and trucking services, but in some cases it's just impossible to go to the bank next door and deposit the amount because they don't have an account there. So the risking for agents is also an issue that exists today in many places, in the sending countries mostly, that I know of. Nina, you have you can unmute your microphone there. Nina is also part of the private sector work stream. We had a meeting very early this morning, very early for me because I am in the US. Leon and Nina are already in their afternoon. So we had a meeting. I don't know if you have a question, or please make your comments.
Well, I had a question. Hello from Frankfurt, Germany to everyone. It's getting a little dark. I'm sorry for that. I have a question that maybe I should not be answering, but you and Leon, we're working so hard with different stakeholders on tackling the issue of COVID-19 for that industry. We are advising so many great institutions with names that we see on the news on so many other big topics like the UN, like the World Bank. So what will they do with this report that the group is providing? And we are here to obviously get as much more input from everyone attending as we can. But the question in the room is, what are they doing with it? Are they really listening to us? Is there our work, our spirit, our voice, is it heard? Or is it more of a, thank you, we have a report and we'll store it with the files? I think that is a question many in the room might have. Obviously, I have an opinion being in this working group, and I think it will be taken to the next level, but I am biased. Maybe you're less biased than myself. I'll unmute myself.
Do you want me to tackle that, Hugo?
No. That's in your lap. I will say that look, Leon and I have been in this for a long time. I mean, years, working with the private sector, working with international organizations. Leon much more than me, but we work together. Because and I definitely feel that the interest of the international organizations on this industry and helping this industry provide the services help, because this is part of not only migration problems and how migrants are treated and migration policies. And yes, that has to change. Remittances are going to be there. And I do feel there is a genuine interest, and I've seen it change through the years from zero, from nothing to what we have today. So because I've seen that long progression on knocking on doors and not being heard, to be able to be invited to these meetings and provide, and the public sector becoming much more engaged. I mean, at the beginning, regulators, international bodies will just meet by themselves. That's 15 years, 12 years. That's not happening anymore. Not even, so I am optimist, Nina, that our voices will be heard. Yes, some of the things will happen. There is a lot of politics around, which I don't understand, and Leon understands much more than me. But there's a genuine interest in seeing this happen. And yes, the situation has brought all of that into the surface, and this is a good moment, really, to bring all that. I have a question here that I want to talk about, because it says, as an academic, I'm wondering if there is a specific question or issues you would like to collaborate on from a research standpoint in the short run. So this is, I mean, we've been discussing how we get the academics, the scholars and researchers to participate. We even have something that is brought at this moment from this pandemic, which is the creation of IORM, the International Organizations of Remittance and Migration. And this is a scholarly group that we want to bring the scholars together with the industry and kind of see if there is. So thank you for the question. We're trying to create this organization to bring the scholars in and provide information. So yes, and Leon, there is funding for some of that. I know it's complex and it takes time, etc. But there is funding that this international organizations that IFAD has also. So I knew you as a head of your DMA, which is a research organization in a way, have been funded for a number of these studies. Am I correct?
You're trying to take business away from us, Hugo, but
no. I'm not.
I know.
Research,
No, I think there is a lot of areas, and it would be good for us to maybe come up with a short list. But particularly for me, I think there's a lot of anything that looks at customer change of behaviour and how they are changing their behaviour to cope with the crisis and transferring money. And I think it links to couple of the other questions around, if you're a cash-based customer, what are you doing now? If you've gone to digital, it would be great to then compare what your behavior is after the crisis is over and you can freely send cash. Do you go back to that, or do you carry on doing what you're doing? I think that would be great. Can I just come back on Nina's challenging question? And I guess, like Hugo, I've got a lot of white hair and I'm an optimist. I do think that there's probably a couple of cases here that give me more confidence that action could be taken. I think, first of all, the fact that the Secretary General of the UN has actually made such a specific announcement about this is sort of quite a big call to action for countries. And I think we've got countries that really want to try and utilize the crisis, or to make sure that they're seen to be doing all they can during the crisis. But I think probably bigger than that is, if we look at everything we read about COVID-19, we might be just in the first wave. There might be 2, 3, or 4 waves coming on behind, potentially over a number of years. And I think many of the countries are really worried that if we are having exactly the same discussion as this during the next wave, or the wave after, or whatever, then we will all have failed. And actually, economically, as well as from a health viewpoint, the world will be in a much worse place. So there's a real imperative to actually try and do some things now that will make sure that if something does come back, we're much better positioned to be able to cope with it. So for me, that seems to be one of the key areas. Can I just talk about, Hugo, I'm going to leave one of these questions to you. I think there's a very interesting, there's a couple of very good interventions. Prakash from Ebix Cash is saying, couldn't a temporary website be created by the task force where all the digital players can come and provide their services? I actually think that's a really interesting idea, Prakash. I don't know how, I mean, I think technically it would be quite feasible, and I'm sure you'd be able to do it much better than anyone else. I think the regulators would probably have some questions about it which could be overcome. But actually, I think if there's a site that can provide information to consumers as well about what services are available, if this site, for instance, could provide some sort of certification, authenticity statement or something that the organizations on it were bona fide agents, etc., etc., that might address some of the trust issues. Whether something like this could happen in the time available, I don't know, but certainly be good to talk about it more and actually have that maybe put in some of the recommendations. And then I think our good friend Laurent from Monito was sort of asking what are some of the biggest pain points for customers making the switch to digital. And I think, without going into too much detail, and certainly happy to talk about this offline, I think, you know, a lot of it is about awareness and trust, and it's nearly always about actually getting switching on into getting converted, to use a digital service. So how do I actually get connected? And what we've learned so far is that quite often it may be somebody in my sort of age or a bit younger who might want to transfer money. They might well ask their children or somebody else from the community to help them get enrolled. But it is quite a big hurdle in the first place. After that, it seems like they're it's much more straightforward for them.
Yeah, and I want to add that this is a great opportunity for fintechs, really, because the combination of services which is happening, and with APIs and that is getting easy to bundle services. So there's this fintechs coming on. Okay, I need this money transfer part. As that happens more and more, and as financial services from the unbanked or the lesser banked or whatever you want to name them comes bundling other services, that may increase that from happening, and it will broaden the opportunity for fintechs to think that, hey, remittance is a thing that I should look at. I'm going to take this opportunity. We have the RemTech Awards. We're having them this year. We need all those ideas to come forward, and we're doing this just for that. The RemTech Awards is just to collect all these ideas and highlight them, just so they can move forward into the future in other stages. So I guess this is the end. Thank you very much. Joyce, I don't know if you want to take over and say goodbye, but we thank you very much. We will do some of these more often, as some of you have asked for, and just have a good day. Bye-bye, Leon.
Sorry, I wasn't waving to say goodbye just yet.
I don't know.
I just wanted to ask or say that I've just had an intervention, by the way, that you'll all be interested in, but just to say, I know we haven't got to all the questions, so I personally am very happy to address any of the questions we haven't had time to answer today separately, or to publish those in conjunction with however you want to handle it. But just to say, while we've been talking, the question about the portal that Prakash brought up, Pedro and his team at IFAD have been listening intently, and so they're very enthusiastic to explore that idea further and potentially to look at it under the International Day of Family Remittances brand as well. So I think if you wanted an example of are people listening, then I can tell you people are listening and responding to the things you've just brought up right away. So thank you very much for that. And I'm keeping us from our time limit, so apologies for that.
Yeah, we apologize because we didn't have enough time to answer all of your questions, but thank you very much for your participation. Thank you everyone for joining our first virtual roundtable of many more to come. And I hope you've enjoyed this interesting discussion and our amazing panelists, Hugo, Leon, Nina, and Kathy. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Have a nice day, everybody, and I hope to see you in 2 weeks.